Traf, how you doing, mate?
Great, man. How are you, Jack?
I am fantastic, thank you. So, for those that don't know, Traf is joining us after making headline news over the past couple of weeks over here. So, if you responded to this invite or you RSVP'd for this event, you probably saw some of the copy that accompanied it, and Traf recently had a great success with a project he was working on, and uh, in it coincided with the upgrade to iOS 14. Is that right, Traf? Apple had made the functionality available for people to switch out icons on their iPhone, and Traf's going to tell a little story about how he took advantage of that moment in culture. But before we get to that story, Traf, it'd be great to hear who you are, where you come from, what you've been working on, how we came to be acquainted and sitting here today.
Definitely. Yeah. Hey, everyone. It's great to be here. First name is James, though people online actually know that. I usually go by Traf. But long story short, as a little history, I moved to Vancouver when I was 19 for a short graphic design program. Discovered I was, horrible at art. Moved on from that. Moved back to Montreal. Got a design job that barely lasted a month. Started a weekend project with a few guys. It was called Spoil, which we can dig into a little bit later. With that, we had gotten into Y Combinator's accelerator program. So we moved out to Silicon Valley for a few years, worked on that, ultimately moved on from that. And since then, again, moved back to Montreal and then just been freelancing and building cool things ever since.
Beautiful, man. So, no stranger to the world of graphic design, and this entire project. I think when we spoke last, you mentioned that you sort of dabbled in this world as a hobby years back, right? The
Yeah,
icon
yeah, yeah, exactly.
scene.
Yeah, back in the day, I used to experiment a lot with in the jailbreaking community. And so, for anyone who doesn't know, it was basically a little outlet that you can use to gain access to your Apple devices. And it would inject basically an app onto your phone called Cydia. And that was like sort of a unofficial app store in a sense. And so people can go and upload their own, packages and themes and icon sets. And so that was the first time I actually dabbled in, creating something and publishing something. I had, at the time I had no idea what I was doing. And so I essentially just copied this guy's icon set, replaced the images with my own, and then called it a day. Um, and I made a few bucks, which is super shocking. And so that's the first time I sort of discovered the idea of digital content leverage in a sense.
And that was like they're like private marketplaces, right? Like little communities that are very specific to the icon and jailbreaking of phones, correct?
Yeah, exactly.
So, talk a little bit about this day here, how this played out.
Yeah, so I was browsing Twitter, and I wasn't the first person to discover this or anything. I actually found a few people sharing their own screenshots of customized iOS 14 home screens, and like I mentioned, like this wasn't new to me at all. And so the only difference was at this point, people were doing it natively with iOS. I mean, somewhat natively. They weren't
Right.
going through the jailbreak process. So it definitely caught my attention. I figured I would try it out since it all came super naturally to me. And then I shared this tweet, and then as you can see, it sort of exploded, and started to see a lot of people commenting on the icons themselves and where they can get them. So that was just me reacting in a sense to demand, and so I quickly put together the icon sets, um, published them using Notion and Super and Gumroad, which we'll dig into, and just been profiting ever since.
Fantastic. So
Yeah.
the period of time in which this scaled, the tweet itself, this is like over the course of a day or so. Is that right? Like the
So
majority of the attention that came from this original tweet.
yeah, it was about so the day after I actually posted the icon set for sale. Overnight I think it was 5 grand in sales. And so it was still somewhat just getting started. And
Right.
actually over the course of a week, about a week is when it like gradually increased views and
All right.
engagement.
So one of the huge catalysts was uh, this gentleman here,
Yeah.
MKBHD, right? I've seen a few of his videos over the years just by way of I think how large his audience is and how
Mhm.
like how incredibly like huge his videos get, and this was a huge catalyst, right, in driving a ton of traffic your way in the first. How long after you put the icons live was this video published?
I think that video was published on the Thursday, and then I had published my tweet on I think it was the Monday or the Sunday or the Monday, so a few days.
That's pretty
And
impressive. Like
yeah,
even
you saw immediately, the day after he posted that video was the biggest sales day, yet. So it was a clear correlation.
and he linked it right in the bio here.
Yeah, if you scroll down, if you click the show more button, I think you'll see it.
This is a screenshot, but
Oh,
he
okay,
put a
okay,
little link. He
okay.
put a little link in
I
there,
just
right?
realized.
That's okay.
Yeah, he linked it in the description. He actually linked my instructions page for some reason. I don't know why. And I noticed this when I first went and checked out my analytics. I realized there
That's
were
yeah,
more
right.
people visiting. Yeah, exactly. There were more people visiting the instructions page than the actual icons page. And I was like, wait, that doesn't look right. So I actually emailed him, and he fixed it and emailed back, said no problem, and so that was cool.
That's badass. Actually, I'm gonna bring in a another screenshot quickly because he tweeted about it too, right after you'd
Yeah, exactly.
seen those results. I'm just gonna pull in a screenshot of that quickly.
Yeah, and you could see the clear jumps in my sort of Gumroad, graph analytics. What events and what actions caused what jumps in numbers, and it's pretty interesting to see because there's a story behind each of those points.
Yeah, crazy. And just being like in that wave in that moment where this thing is just so top of mind and everybody's kind of clamoring to customize their here it is to customize their iPhone screen. I think this had a huge amount of engagement on it too. His tweet, yeah,
Yeah,
26,000 likes on
exactly.
this. So I mean, this is also testament to like how quickly you acted here. And one of the other things that we'll get into this in a minute, but this is not the traditional Gumroad um, presentation of a product either. Which, not to say that would have changed the outcome that drastically, but there is something incredibly
Yeah.
trustworthy about the way you built this too, and how like how legitimately you presented the product. So this is a product of yours, right? That you built this on top of.
Exactly. Yeah. So, well, partly, yeah. So half of it, the majority of it is built on Notion, which was surprising to a lot of people because you look at this and you're like, this doesn't look like Notion, at all. And so, what Super does, which is a product that I built, is basically supercharges Notion in a sense. And you can add custom code and CSS. You can add custom domains, fonts, and you could really customize your Notion page with the purpose of publishing it.
Yeah, it's great. Like, yeah, there's definitely like a just this additional layer of like commercialization almost that sits on top of this, and then you integrate Gumroad as a like popover, right? This is a Gumroad.
Exactly. Yeah. And yeah, like you mentioned, like I could have, just stuck with the Gumroad product page. I probably would have gotten away fine with that. But I know that I wanted to add like a bunch of content surrounding the icons, like a showcase page, instructions on how to actually use them, a list of the icons. So like having that all in a centralized place um, would be, advantageous to potential consumers.
And this may be trade secrets, but do you have these icons lying around? that you'd been working on before?
I definitely had a few of them lying around as vector graphics that made it easy to kind of just like dump into a project I was working.
Yeah, yeah, because it was the turnaround time was pretty savage as well, right? From that screenshot to the product. And here's super for those interested. You should definitely check this out. But we could come back and speak a little bit to this. I have something in the agenda specific to that. But
For sure.
what I wanted to ask you next was this level of interest that came, funnel straight into this product page, and obviously was associated with your brand. When we chatted before we got on to this call, you said that there was, it had a kind of compound effect on different areas of your business too. So, can you speak to what that traffic did to these other areas and how you're seeing kind of the ripple effects of this project playing out?
For sure. Yeah, I think that was probably one of the most surprising things about all of this is that it gave me a new outlook in a sense on marketing. I learned that you don't have to market the thing you're trying to market if it's well integrated into your digital profile. And so in that sense, side projects are marketing tactics in a way with just a longer shelf life, if you look at it a certain way. And the icon store is a great example of this because I was getting so many eyeballs on my Twitter profile and my website that anything I placed in my bio or on my site just got a ridiculous amount of traffic. And I even had a past client reach out to me asking me why he was getting so much traffic from my website just because I listed him, under my portfolio section as a link, And
Yeah.
so, anything that goes crazy and starts to produce sort of digital wildfire on the internet, it'll trickle down to everything that you do or everything that you're working on. And not only that, but because of all I think I quadrupled my following in about 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And so anything that I put out in the future obviously has 4 times the amount of potential eyeballs that'll further create bigger ripple effect.
Yeah, and I think you said it just there, but the idea that this all happened under your own name and you had this infrastructure to capture all of this inbound interest in a portfolio site, like that traffic going to a piece of infrastructure that you own and then amplifying out to all of these projects that you built. And you mentioned that Super is a SaaS product essentially, right? That people subscribe to this over the long term, and I would, my gut would be, what's the crossover between people who want icon sets and people who are like potential customers for Super? You would think the Venn diagram would not be that, there would not be that much overlap, but it has led to a bunch of subscribers here as well. Is that correct?
Exactly. Yeah, a whole lot of the short-term hype has been feeding into the more long-term revenue. And that's an interesting point with the whole crossover thing, just because, I made sure, on the bottom of my icon site to list out that this site was actually created using, Notion and Super and Gumroad. And so obviously, a lot of people would trickle into Super from the icons page. And I've actually been seeing, probably, I think maybe like 30 or 40 pages get created onto Super that all are icon pages now.
Right,
So like
right.
their own people, like their own icons, just being listed on Gumroad, and people are listing that on, using Notion and Super to actually publish that to the web.
Yeah, I could see, Super as like a Gumroad skin to just really like elevate the positioning of a Gumroad product is really powerful. So
Yeah, and
awesome
yeah,
work
that's a
there.
good point. And I think we're actually, we started with putting a lot of emphasis on the fact that this is, dependent on Notion, which of course it is, but in a very simple term, excluding that whole idea, I think it's one of the quickest ways to get your own space on the web, and publish that. And so using a tool that you normally use for notes and documentation and tasks and things like that, you can actually just, it's like Notion is like one of the world's simplest CMSs now, in a way.
Yeah, you know what? Another thing I want to draw attention to, like that was the intent of the background piece, is your skill set and the projects that you've worked on and the skills that you've honed individually. You have a co-founder in this, is that right? But you are like you've built a lot of the front end web stuff as well as the visual component, correct?
Exactly. Yeah, I do have a co-founder. His name is Jason, and he takes care of all the back end and infrastructure stuff while I maintain the design, the product design, and the brand and the branding and so forth.
Very cool, man. Yeah, so everybody on this call, I think, with few exceptions, will be Notion users to some degree. So I'm sure checking this out, you'll see some value, or you'll see some way to take advantage of what Traf has built here. So the next piece, I'm actually going to move one of these slides up. You mentioned, just based on that discussion about Super, you've seen essentially this success you've had, this project that has obviously received a ton of eyeballs and dollars, ultimately results in this like huge wave of imitators and imitation. I was even scrolling through a couple of the comments of your of the tweets that you posted to promote the product, and there's people trying to cross promote their stuff even in the comments of your tweet. So just curious for your experience with that, and yeah, exactly, and how you was there is this the first time you've experienced something like that? How did you think about it, and what's going on with it now?
Yeah, interestingly, I think what prepared me for that idea was, I do a bit of photography in my spare time, or at least I used to, and so I had previously, before I even sent out a single tweet, I was very active on Instagram and shared a lot of my photography work on Instagram, and it also had somewhat of a unique style, and excuse me. And a lot of people were actually, just taking my work and using it as their own, in terms of like their own photos and their own photo content. And so, at first it used to bother me on Instagram when I used to see my own photos being used for, them claiming as their own. But then I just looked at it, I'm just like, there's nothing I can really do about it. I can either worry about it or I can continue creating good content. And I think you've probably seen a ton of this with visualized value content. I mean, it's so iconic and simple in a sense that it's sort of hard not to replicate after you see it.
Sure.
But it all sort of, in a way, leads back to you for anyone who knows, visualized value and my sense of style as well.
Yeah, that totally resonates, and the way I think about it is like just as a function of you finding something that works, the market expands naturally, right? And there's going to be a number of people that are, it's kind of like if people, not that I'm making this comparison to myself, but if somebody, if Louis Vuitton sells handbags, there's an opportunity for somebody to sell a $20 Louis Vuitton handbag on Canal Street just by a function of that thing commanding a certain price and a certain amount of interest. So it's kind of a natural effect if you figure out something that works, that you're going to experience that that phenomenon to some extent. The next question, go on.
Yeah, another good example of that is like, on a massive scale is Elon Musk, him needing to sort of make the electric car market, grow in a sense. And so he, publishes his patents for everyone and all other competitors to use and grow, because he knew that in order to grow Tesla, he would actually need to grow the entire market beforehand.
Right. Yeah, it's a great, at a principle level, that makes a ton of sense. The immediate human reaction, and I guess that's why he's such a so successful at doing what you would think the opposite of most people would do, is because you're thinking way beyond your personal emotional reaction to it, and more towards what needs to happen for this to work at scale over a long period of time. The other thing we talked about on our earlier call is this idea of the experience that you had, the the overnight transformation of your business and your income being this super interesting thing that people are completely it's another component of the story that really generates a ton of interest. It's like what MKBHD wrote about, it's what BBC News wrote about, and I'm sure that the press coverage has been insane. Can you talk a little bit about your level of comfort with being transparent about the success of the project?
For sure, yeah. I think that's also something that came a little bit naturally to me just because, with previous projects, my revenue numbers were there, but they were quite low. And so I had no problem at all just like sharing, open metrics and open startups pages and things like that to do with any of my other projects. And so it sort of came naturally at first. And so after the first night, I was just inclined to share the numbers that I've experienced because
Hmm.
that's what I've been doing. But after a certain point, it got to like, how long
Right.
am I going to keep sharing for? At what point does it become, I don't know, does it start to feel a little strange or something like that? But and that's what I had shared numbers, and then one person had asked me for like a revenue update, and I was just like, and I asked them personally, I was like, what, at what point do you think it'll be weird to stop sharing that? And he was just like, I think you should just keep sharing. Everyone I'm sure is interested, and that tweet alone got some good engagement. So I figured then and there, I was just like, there's no point for me to just stop sharing if it's working so well, and it's uncomfortable at first, but people love talking about money and especially the story behind it, and I think that's why my blog post did super well as well.
Yeah, it's
um,
incredibly
yeah,
inspiring. I think particularly in this case because it's so it really does teach the scale of the internet. Like because it's this is not $1,000 product or even a couple $100 product. It's $28, and number of sales has got to be in the five figures now or close to that, right?
yeah.
Yeah, which is just another amazing and inspiring story, I think, for people that are pursuing similar things or just need to kind of update their model of what's possible. I think this has been an incredible story for that.
Yeah, and one thing that I would say is what people have to remember also is that other people's success isn't your failure, but it
Right.
could be your motivation. I used to be very unsure whenever I saw someone I knew who experienced success. Of course, I was happy for them, but I also, it also often made me feel a little bit down in a way.
Hmm.
But now when I see it, I'm just inspired. And so I think, if you're moving in the right direction, I think the life anyone's after is not as far as they think if they publish their work.
Agreed, man. And the one thing that I think I don't have a slide for this particularly, but the thing that I would love to talk about for a little bit is the idea that this stuff is like clicking in place in hindsight. So we talked a little bit about, this was something that you played around with in this really niche community years and years ago. At the time, that wasn't necessarily something that I'm going to go into business and this is going to be like a
Yeah,
huge source of revenue for me in the future. It's just like pursuing a set of interests. And I think that's true across the work that you do. And this just happens to be, an opportunity that you identified as a result of a bunch of those skills coming together.
exactly. Yeah. And yeah, you said it well. And I really think sometimes being an entrepreneur just means that finding the right time to leverage what you're good at, and what you've already been doing in a sense. Because there are new things and new trends and new ideas and markets being created every day. And so, just making sure that you're spending time on the things that you're enjoying, um, and making sure that you're sharing that with the world, because I think that's an important piece of it, that if you're not used to sharing, then if the opportunity comes to light, you won't really know how to do it and you won't really be quick on your feet. And so I think if you're doing what you enjoy and sharing what you enjoy, then finding the right time to leverage your skill set is key.
So I'm gonna another line of questioning for you. I think as a designer, you have
Mm-hmm.
that very tangible path to sharing work. Right? It's like you've been in the school of producing things that people can see. You've developed this skill that's very easy to point at and say, "Hey, here's this thing I made," I believe that that same process applies regardless of whether or not you have, you know, a skill that manifests itself visually, let's say. But I think, just anecdotally speaking, a lot of people get stuck and don't have that same encouragement or that same it's almost like a discipline within the design community, right? Your portfolio is what you live off of, essentially. If you're a freelancer, like if you don't have a portfolio, you're not getting another job. That's like, if you wanted, like, even to get into design school in some places, you have to have a portfolio already. And throughout school, you're constantly producing work that you can point at, that I think, honestly, in a lot of cases gives designers this edge because they've been taught to think that way. I just think that school of thought could definitely be applied in other areas as well.
Right. Yeah. I it's a funny way to look at it because even to me, when I look at my icons page, I'm used to creating websites from scratch with, HTML and CSS and some JavaScript, and even, sites on Webflow, which still have complete control over. Um, and so for my icons, it was actually like one of the first few things that I used for, Notion as a website for. Notion and Super as a website for. And so even now, like, it having on my on a subdomain instead of like a slash domain, it still bothers me, or some
Right.
design choices that are on the icons page, some of those still bother me, And
Right.
so I think it's important to understand that it's never going to be, the things that you're putting out are never going to be perfect, and it's just never going to happen. And so you have to really think about what is the minimum amount of work or design that I need to put on a page in order for something to be good enough and for it to work.
Yeah, agreed, man. And I think, you know, you've been in this game for a long time, so it'll probably be hard for some people to see this and be like, "What do you mean? There's something wrong with it?" But I get what you're saying. There's
Yeah,
like,
exactly. As a designer, you
you're
get what I'm saying, but
your own
yeah,
work is like your own worst critic, and there's always this gap between what you believe to be good enough and what the market will accept as good enough, and get
exactly.
like 90% of the value that you could have. Well, honestly, the design and iteration process, the more you do that in silent and private, the bigger the risk you're taking, essentially. So you haven't put it out and
Exactly.
getting a
Yeah.
response.
Yeah, and I think to add to that, there are great folks like yourself who are sharing resources on how to on things like design fundamentals. So if you're lacking in any sort of area, which I know I am, I'll find people who aren't, and I'll consume their content until I'm good enough to be able to create a version of my own. And so, yeah, there's always content there to learn from and people to learn from.
There is indeed, and you kind of made this transition now. I know we spoke recently from the service, time for pay setup where you're kind of seeking out clients and working with them one on one. Is your what's your trajectory now? You're trying to move away from those client engagements. You're focusing more on the product stuff. What's next for
Yeah,
Traf?
yeah, exactly. About this time last year, let's say I was spending 90% of my time on freelance work, which is essentially like you said, like trading time for money in a sense. And ever since, I've been trying to like continually get better and better and bigger clients so that I could spend less time but still make some more money. Um, and so I've been continually transitioning to that point, and now I'm at a point where I can just drop freelance work completely, and focus on projects that I 100% have control over. And there's really no limit to that in terms of income, in terms of reach and things like that. And so that's what I really enjoy.
That's awesome, man. Are these good examples of client projects, or are these all your projects? Patch.
Yeah, this is a client of mine, Patch. They're doing really important work, and this was like a Webflow site that I put together for them.
That's beautiful, man. Very talented. I wanted to also, I I haven't seen this before, but we've been talking a lot about the concept of the permissionless apprenticeship. And this is something
Yep.
that in the design community is so, it's become so obvious because it's just a practice that's kind of, done the rounds, as it were. Like you have a skill set and you can just take on a project that hasn't been commissioned to you. You can go and redesign the website of a brand you want to work with, or you can go and, cut up a video of a person that you want to like become a video editor for. Is that what you've done here?
Yeah, that's exactly right. At this time, I was actually applying for a job at Exodus,
Oh,
and I figured, I've always felt that, a resume was just not sufficient. In a way, I feel I just look at resumes as just like a history of your failures,
yeah,
and so
right, right.
and so I always try and find ways to better express. Even portfolios I feel are most of the time out of context, and so I
Fair
feel
enough.
feel like the best way is just to like put in the work in the context of the company that you're trying to apply for. And so this was my application. Like I didn't even say hi. I didn't. This was my cover letter. This is my resume. This is my portfolio. And
Love it.
ultimately that got me to have an important conversation with someone and got me really close until the point where I actually decided that I this is not actually something that I wanted.
Incredible. Like the time investment on this thing is not insignificant, and the beauty of it is, we were talking about this a little bit last week. Regardless of whether or not you pursue that job, this is an asset that you now have, proof of work
Exactly.
over that is probably
Yeah,
helped you
and
learn a couple
actually,
new things, and there's
yeah,
no
and
downside
and
to it.
actually, this is another example of this, but for a side project. It was sort of a project that I put in the initial time investment more in for. I created a website. Ultimately, I moved on from it because I figured it was a little bit out of my skill set in a way. But a few weeks later, I got someone reaching out to me who said, "Hey, I saw that site you built for it, and I'd like to buy it as a template for my own project." And so same sort of thing that would could happen to something like this. People would visit it here and see it and want to use it for their own product and could potentially buy it from you. So creating and publishing is has tremendous benefits that you would never think of.
Uh, with that, um, with that topic switch, can you talk about this new thing you're working on that you told me about
Which
last
thing you're
time?
talking about?
The template thing?
Webflow templates.
Yeah, yeah. So
Yeah.
I think
So well,
it's just a good segue into that idea.
for sure. Yeah, I think there's two things that I'm working on in regards to that, and they both have to do with sort of publishing websites in a sense. So I'm trying to make it much easier and simpler for others to publish their work on their
Hmm.
own little space on the web. And so that would be a website, and I'm doing Notion templates as well, and that's being done all within Super. And then outside of Super, I'm also working on a project with a friend of mine for Webflow templates. And Webflow and Notion are, in a way now they're both publishing platforms. One is a little more sophisticated than the other, but both projects are trying to add a design layer to making it easier to publish your work and have it live on a website of your own.
Yeah, and I think that just hearing that has been the kind of not necessarily the resting place, but the most recent destination of your career as a web designer and front end developer is you've gone through this period of transitioning from, hey, let's build this very specific thing for this very specific use case for this very specific person, all the way up to what are the frameworks or the products or the design toolkits that can be leveraged by 100 people who have this objective or 1,000 people that have this objective. So like that process of iteration again, when you're working on the one website toiling away for weeks and weeks, you don't really see that in the moment. At least this is my experience. But then
Mm-hmm.
3 years down the road, you're like, okay, now I get how I could leverage those things that I did spend 3 weeks on that had zero leverage in the moment, but now I can deploy them in a way that can help far more people.
Exactly. Yeah, and I feel like you went through a similar trajectory in a sense when you started with opponent and dealing with client work, and then moving on to visualize value, where you're building sort of leverage.
Yeah, and there's also the I think the way you've constructed your brand is super interesting and well done as well. So the way you've linked all these things together, and the way you can benefit from this single side project blowing up, and people can kind of get into the Traf universe and see all of this other stuff you're working on. I think that takes a long time to one, it just all the work that needs to be a part of that for it to feel like a big enough ecosystem that somebody can explore. But it's also, I think, a bit of a mental model that you have. It may be an esoteric question, but I'd love to hear how you think about that.
Yeah, it's it's something that's really, really ongoing. It's like I'm going to be 80 years old on my 2000th website revision,
Yeah.
and thinking, maybe this is the best way to go about it. So, so it's definitely an ongoing process, and something that I still struggle with in a sense. Like, so if I'm building a project, even if it's like this micro product, should I build it, outside of my website, and profit from it somehow, outside of it, or should I build it within the website? And so for anyone visiting, it's sort of like you have a different array of experiences. I even
Mm-hmm.
have this. If you go to the URL, it's actually not as a page, but if you go to the URL slash mixtapes, um, it'll just be like I don't even know if it's still live. I hope it is. Yeah.
There
So
you go. Yeah.
it'll just be like an ongoing playlist of like chill music and
Oh,
lo-fi
wow.
radio. Um, and I also have that as a separate domain on Sunday.fm. And so I'm actually like experimenting with this whole idea on its own. And so like building something outside of my website, or keeping it internal in a sense. So they do the exact same thing. They just have a different brand attached to them.
Super cool, man. I think, like, again, this is really hard to describe what all these things are, but the
Yeah.
idea of just continuing to like execute under your own name and just folding all of these projects under your like brand as a kind of umbrella for everything is really interesting. It gets to your point of people really understand how you think and what you're capable of, and um, the proof of work that you have out in the market. So I just think like this is one of the best examples of that exists, and I think it should be a more common practice to think about your digital identity this way, right? If you can start to tie all of these things together, you really get a sense for what someone cares about and what they value and what they're good at by clicking through the digital world like this.
Yeah, exactly. I find personal websites like way under leveraged right now. People don't take enough advantage of them, and it's like your home in the digital world, and you could really express and share anything that you want on there, um, and and yeah, which is why I'm also working on templates and products to make that whole process easier. And there's also other project that I'm actually playing around with, that because of all this transparency that I've been pushing out these last few weeks. One thing that I noticed is like I ended up sharing, and I feel like this is something that you can familiarize yourself with as well. I'm end up putting together screenshots from Gumroad and Baremetrics and
Yeah.
Stripe, and from a bunch of these different sources, and so now I'm working on a product that compiles all of your metrics into one unified dashboard, with the purpose of sharing them. And
Very
so there's going to
cool.
be like a public link, and it's always going to be up to date, and it's going to grab your site analytics, your revenue numbers, your followers on different
Wow,
social
badass.
platforms, and just dump it all into one dashboard.
Well, if you need any beta testers, mate, sling it my way.
You're the first person I thought of.
That's great, man. That's a great idea. Um, yeah, I think there's some like indie hackers community where they do a little bit of that with the SaaS metrics specifically, but again, it doesn't measure like the universe of every input, and I think this like new age creator, like you're on all these different platforms, you're working on all these different projects, and it's just hyper complicated stuff. So that sounds like a great little
For
project.
sure. Managing time is, or I should say, managing yourself going through time is getting increasingly more and more difficult.
Yeah,
But
the administrative burden of all the different platforms and stuff is crazy too. If anyone has any questions, just drop them in the chat. But we'll keep chatting here, and if anything pops in, we'll take it. If not, we will we'll close out early. I was just pulling this up while you were talking, but this is what you were talking about, the photography that was getting ripped off all over the place.
yeah, exactly. And you know what's funny? You know, because it was getting ripped off, I was like, okay, well, I may as well just share them out to the world for anyone to use. And so I published them all on Unsplash,
Yeah.
and you know they've collectively gotten almost 40 million views, which has then directed even more traffic directly to my site, which has then directed more traffic to anything else that I'm working on. And so it's sharing is just has this impossible amount of benefits.
There you go. Look at this too. Yeah, man. I'm almost certain that I've used your photos in one client presentation or another, maybe even some commercial work at some point in time. We actually do a little bit of work with Unsplash, and the network effects of that platform is so bonkers. It's absolutely mind
Unreal.
blowing.
I remember, I think it was, I had shared these photos, and then I think like 2 months later, I just randomly looked at my stats. I didn't even know you could. And once I did, I was like, what, 40 million views, like 600,000 downloads. What is going on here?
Yeah. All right, we got a couple of questions here for you, Traf. First one is, how do you prioritize what to work on? Sounds like you've got plenty of projects on the go at any one time. How do you think about that?
Yeah, the truth is that I don't have any sort of formal process involved. I think whatever is most pressing, which lately has been super, and customer support, and so needing to actually build out product-based infrastructure to solve for that time that I'm spending on support, takes priority right now. Because everything else, so it's most things outside of that are not demanding any sort of my time. It's just a choice and will to work on them. And so this is one of the few things that is. And so that's to be solved for first. And then, whenever I want to move on or work on something different for a few moments, I pick the next best thing. And I don't really work linearly. I mostly just, jump from one project to another based on however I'm feeling at that time.
Good stuff. We love an honest answer, mate. The next question, Andres asked about, can you both elaborate on your personal brand and the use of black? I don't know if I have a very compelling answer for that, but Traffic, I'll let you take that one first.
Yeah, I think the key word there is personal. And so I don't think there's a very good reason outside of, it's what we resonate most with. When I started, posting pictures on Instagram, what made the most sense for me was just like black and white, and then maybe throw in some variants of color every now and then. But that sort of stuck with me. It started with photos, and then I expanded on that as a brand. And but I think other people who are thinking the same way, say, I want to use black now. I think a better way to look at it is, good design adapts to its product in a way, and offering, and so I think if it's a personal website, it's really what you should feel most confident about personally. And if it's a product you're building, like Super is very bright, is very has some touches of yellow. It's like nothing to do with my personal persona.
Mm-hmm.
It has everything to do with what I want people to feel when landing on the page.
Yep, it's a great answer. I would echo that. I think a lot of the design decisions you make personally are very easy to justify in hindsight, like why they worked.
Yeah.
But when you're making them in the moment, it's more often than not just a drive. Like, I think this looks cool, and I could work within this color space for a long time. At least that's how I thought about it. The black and white was like free of trend, as it were. It was like, I'm going to get sick of looking at, hue X of whatever color if I'm going to make 1,000 of these things. So black and white just completely kills that.
It scales visually.
Right, exactly. So that was a decision on my end. Joaquim asks about, do you think ahead of time about monetizing things and creating synergy? A lot of what you're doing sounds like a happy accident. I'm building a design blog currently only on Instagram, and I'm trying to figure out how to make money off it, but I'm in the mindset of when I have enough followers, I can more easily figure it out. Thoughts?
Yeah, I think if you're doing things for the sake of, enjoyment, then it's not something you really have to think about. Like, and it's not something, for instance, when I published the tweet with my icons, it wasn't something that I thought about at all, like 0% until I really started to notice demand for them. And that's when I just responded to it. So I didn't
Right.
think about it initially. But when it comes to, some of the other digital products that I'm thinking of putting out, like this public dashboard, like for sure I'm thinking about it, monetizing it from the start. Like there's not going to be any free option. I'm doing it in for myself, but also with the goal of making money.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's like there's an important distinction there, right? There are these activities that you do that are essentially you just like putting out and publishing things and waiting for a signal. And if the energy that's going into producing those things is renewable, then you're just like in this waiting game. And for yourself and for myself, a couple of years ago, you do have these work engagements that underlie that give you the, they may be somewhat rooted in what you're interested in, maybe not fully aligned, but they do let you build skills and make money and have enough time to mess around with the stuff that you're really interested in on the side. And uh, I guess it's a fortunate thing that that you start with the enjoyment piece and then you figure out the monetization angle, because if you go the other way around, then you like build yourself a cage essentially.
Exactly. And in a way, it's whatever you're working on will start to feel like work way faster than if you're
Right.
going the other way around. And so if you're doing something for fun, you'll grow it a little bit more naturally. And, maybe you can find a way to monetize it versus if you monetize something from the start, it might feel like work and then it'll prohibit you from actually pushing anything out at all.
Yeah, and I think in when we first spoke, this was got to be almost a year ago now. The idea that Super in particular was going to replace all of your income was not the idea, right? It was just a side project that was
Oh,
you
yeah,
weren't
yeah, yeah, for
necessarily
sure.
all in it in to the degree that you would raise money and quit your job and like have to scale it to size X, otherwise all fails.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And that's interesting. I had a conversation with a friend the other day about this in terms of, their outlook on the riskiness of starting something and my outlook on it and how they were, completely black and white. And so for me, super was maybe, half an hour a day or maybe like 1 or 2 days a week that I would spend on it, and whatever sort of came from that would be a benefit. Versus their outlook, which was, if you're starting something, you have to direct all of your energy, all of your
Right.
time. You have to quit your job, right? So
Yeah,
I
yeah,
think
yeah.
I think it's important to distinguish that a lot of these things are really, the V1 of them, or I think you coined this or someone, but the version zero could be something so small that you don't have to think about monetization. You don't have to think about brand or branding. You don't have to think about too much. You just got to start somewhere, and then a bunch of other answers will sort of figure themselves out along the way.
Yeah, I think that's well put, and especially the piece about you know the the speed at which it begins to feel like work. That's when the nosedive begins. Right? It's like I'm
Yeah,
not interested in working on this anymore, and I'm making $16 a month off of it. It's just you can't justify that to yourself. So totally different
exactly.
way of looking at it. And if you have that like work engagement or career or whatever it is that that I was sitting in that position for years and years where it's like I don't like I'm not in love with this thing, but it's like helping me build skills that I know at some point I'm going to be able to
Exactly. Exactly.
pivot to something that I am completely in control of. And the enjoyment
Yeah.
factor beginning that thing was just super important
Yeah. There's
in
only
maintaining that
so
feeling
much you
after.
can. Yeah. Exactly. There's only so much you can love something if you're not doing it for yourself, I think.
Agreed. Agreed. I think the longer you kind of trick yourself into thinking there is, the longer you stay stuck, for sure.
Yep.
All right, man. One last question from Dev. What is the stack for your website? Is this Webflow?
So yeah, just HTML, SAS, some jQuery, hosted on Netlify. Really simple stuff.
All right, beautiful. Well, on that note, my friend,
It's
we
been great, man.
will. It's been phenomenal. Keep killing it. I'll make sure that everybody in here gets the link to all these projects, and I'll send you a Slack invite so you can pop in there if you have a sec.
Sounds great. Best way to keep updated with future projects, just follow me on Twitter at Traf, and
That's right.
it's been a blast.
It's been excellent, mate. Thank you so much. We will be in touch shortly.
Absolutely. Thanks, Jack.
Cheers, Traf. All the best, mate. Bye bye.
Later.